Some of the images and sounds you're about to see and hear are graphic in nature. Viewer discretion is advised.
The World Trade Center, tower number 1 is on fire. The whole outside of the building was just a huge explosion. And every available ambulance, everything you got to the World Trade Center.
From my vantage point, I didn't see a plane hit the building, but I did see an explosion occur. My God, I can't believe it.
When American Airlines Flight 11 crashed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center at 8:46 a.m. on September 11, 2001, about 6,000 people were in the building. Unaware of what had happened, they used their phones to get information from the outside world and to make contact with loved ones.
I want to say how much I love you. I think I'm okay, I'm safe now, but Smokey.
The calls came from survivors.
I'm okay, all right? Want to see you? I'm going to hold you.
And they came from some of the 3,000 who never came home.
Sean, it's me. I just wanted to let you know I love you, and I'm stuck in this building in New York. There's lots of smoke, and we just wanted you to know that I love you always.
Some of these calls were recorded, and some are etched in the memories of those left behind.
No, you can stay on the line with
These calls and these radio transmissions, they show us through sound what we couldn't see with our eyes.
Sean, that's a fire. That's love. I love you, too. I love you. I don't know if I'm going to be okay, so I love you so much.
The World Trade Center, tower number 1 is on fire.
The deluge started almost immediately. There were 3,000 calls to 911, the emergency dispatchers in the first 10 minutes. And the calls kept coming in.
We have numerous people trapped.
The plane hit from the 93rd to the 99th floor, and it destroyed the stairwells in the 92nd floor.
Yes, I had a call for the World Trade Center. Yeah. 106 floor, the man said the floor is on fire.
Okay.
And that's the windows on the world, One World Trade Center, 106 floors.
At the top of the North Tower, 100 people were attending a conference at Windows on the World restaurant. Among them was Christopher Hanley, an executive for Radiance, a financial systems company. He made one of the first recorded calls to 911 that day.
Yeah, hi. I'm on the 106th floor of the World Trade Center. We just had an explosion.
The 106th floor?
Yes.
106, okay.
We had smoke, and it's pretty bad. We can't get down the stairs.
All right.
We had about 100 people up there.
Do not leave, okay? There's a fire or an explosion or something in the building. All right, I want you to stay where you are.
Yes.
All right, we're there. We're coming up to get
See
you.
the smoke coming up from outside the windows down?
All right, we're on the way. Just sit tight. All right, just sit tight. We're on the way.
All right, please hurry.
Christopher was our only child. He was so special.
To be able to have the 911 audio was really very important. The most emotional, poignant moment for me is when he asked him, "Please hurry," and "Thank you."
All right, please hurry.
To be able to have that
Presence of mind.
Under pressure like that, I thought was just remarkable. I was really proud of him. I mean, to be able to keep that cool and request, "Please hurry." I think that was his last words.
The sonic record of that day, the audible record of that day, is essential because the visual record of that day is limited to the exteriors.
Fire on several floors. The upper floor, 105.
He says he's at the 105th floor at One World Trade Center.
They're part the fabric of the day that we wouldn't know or have any understanding of without this sonic record.
Brian Nunez was an office manager at Cantor Fitzgerald on the 104th floor of the North Tower. He was just 6 floors above the plane's impact.
I woke up to my telephone ringing. I worked nights at the time, so I didn't want to be bothered. And then my cell phone rang again. And I'm like, I'm not going to answer it.
First saved message.
Neil, it's Brian. A plane crashed into the Trade Center. It's on fire, and I'm in it. And I can't breathe. Tell everyone I love them. I don't get out of here. Goodbye.
End of message.
Brian left that message, and that must have been the first or second phone call that I received that morning. And I mean, I just didn't realize it. You know, it's really hard to struggle with, you know, what would have happened if I answered the phone? You know, but I mean, I couldn't do anything, even if I did answer it. I keep the message on an MP3 file, so I have it on CD. I have it hidden away in a safe. I have it, you know, on every hard drive I have. I have it like everywhere, just so that nothing happens to it. It's Brian's last words.
I don't get out of here.
One of the reasons why recordings were made was so people could record their last words. You know, I mean, I think it gives me a little bit of guidance. I like draw from Brian's strength when I hear the message.
Melissa Harrington Hughes was a business executive attending a meeting on the 101st floor of the North Tower.
I just wanted to let you know I love you, and I'm stuck in this building in New York. There's lots of smoke, and I just wanted you to know that I love you always.
Melissa was in New York for just one day.
September 11th started like any other morning. Woke up, put a pot of coffee in. So I was making the bed and the telephone rang. Well, I don't usually answer the phone, but this morning I did. It was my daughter, Melissa. I knew she was in New York. She was only going to be there that Tuesday. When the merger was done, she was flying back to California the next day. I didn't know anything that happened at that particular point in time. Melissa was a little hysterical. I told her, honey, you have to slow down so that your father can understand what the problem is. She got her composure, said to me, Dad, I'm on the 101st floor of the World Trade Center and a bomb just went off. In my bedroom was a TV set. I turned it on, happened to be on CNN. I saw the fire, I saw the smoke. I was heartbroken. She told me the fire wasn't her major concern, but there was an awful lot of smoke. So I said to her, honey, I said, can you see an exit sign? She said, yes, Dad. And I said, well, under all the exit signs, honey, are stairwells. I said, you get to that stairwell as fast as you can and get out of the building.
It was very unusual that people outside had almost a greater sense of alarm and urgency than the people inside who were in the dark. Families were seeing the billowing smoke and the flames licking up the side of the building. It was just a terrible responsibility for the people on the outside to have to say, it's worse than you think.
In the North Tower, Michelle Cartier, an executive assistant, had just started her day.
I just felt like this day was just not going to end right. It was just not going to be a good day. And little did I know that it would be a day that changed the rest of my life. Went to work that morning, worked at World Trade Center 1 for Lehman Brothers. We were based on the 40th floor. Started going through my emails. It was a normal routine, preparing for the day. And the next thing I know, the building moves. And I could hear the computers sizzling. Then the whole floor just evacuates.
Michelle's brother James was also working that day in the Twin Towers, but in the South Tower. In his job as an electrician, James Cartier moved between different floors.
The only thing that I wanted to do was to find out where James was. Even though he was 4 years younger, he always had that older brother role in taking care of everybody.
As part of a large, close family growing up in Queens, James used to go biking with his older brother, John.
John was teaching James how to ride the motorcycle, so they shared that passion and love for the motorcycle.
John was working nearby when James called him from the South Tower.
He called me to say that Tower 1 had been hit by a plane. He could see the smoke, and that Michelle, my sister, was in Tower 1, and he didn't know what floor she was on. So, you know, we immediately went into, you know, family mode, you know. And I said to my brother James, had I known it was my last words, I would have probably chose better words. But, you know, I just told him I'll meet you on the street and I'll be there.
As we were descending, people were helping one another, you know, just regular, everyday workers just helping each other get down the stairs. And I remembered saying to myself, well, as soon as I get to the last step and I get outside, I'll try him again. All of a sudden, in this crowd of thousands of people, I look up and I see my brother John.
John was at the World Trade Center because he had received a phone call from his brother James, who was on one of the higher floors of the South Tower. Their plan was to meet and find Michelle.
Now, I wouldn't have been there at all had he not called me. But his thoughts weren't of himself. His thoughts were of my sister, and that we, as her brothers, have a job to do now, to go get her and get her out of there.
15 minutes after the North Tower was hit, most people in the South Tower, Tower 2, were still at their desks. Brad Fetchett, an equities trader, was one of them.
Hey Mom, it's Brad. Just wanted to call and let you know, I'm sure that you heard that a plane crashed into World Trade Center 1. We're fine, we're in World Trade Center 2. I'm obviously alive and well over here, but obviously a pretty scary experience. I saw a guy fall out of probably the 91st story all the way down. So you're welcome to give a call here. I think we'll be here all day, but give me a call back later. Love you.
He was trying to reassure us that he was okay, but you could tell as he cleared his voice when he talked about seeing someone fall from the 91st floor that there was a lot of fear in his voice.
It's available anytime I want to play it back. It's there. I hear it, and I know it, and I'm still very fragile to listen to it, and so I'm comforted to know it's there, but I don't listen to it.
Charlie Caraher, a systems analyst for Morgan Stanley, worked on the 68th floor in the South Tower.
I just backed up my chair and looked out, and I could see like the window looking out over New Jersey, and it actually looked like snow. There were so many pieces of paper, it actually looked like snow. There's a group of about 10 of us standing, looking north towards the Empire State Building, and there was like a lot of smoke. It was almost like clouds, and all of a sudden this person pops out of it, and he just made it look so easy. He seemed so calm. He just like looked to the left, to the right, and then two people jumped. And as the lady passed by the window, she made eye contact. You could see through the windows, and that really spooked me. I mean, you can communicate a lot by just, you know, with your eyes. And I had to get away from the window. They started, you know, making a choice, you know, burn to death at 2,000 degrees or jump. The smell of jet fuel was getting stronger and stronger, and the sound of the fire alarms just going off, and they had these bright light flashers, was just really getting annoying. And I went at first to use the elevators, but the elevators weren't working. So I went back, and I remember pausing by the fire escape we were supposed to use, and I figured, no, I want to let Catherine know I'm on my way to see her. That's how come I went back to my desk to leave the message on her phone.
Hi, Catherine. This is Charlie. I'm okay, all right? I want to see you. I'm going to hold you. I'll talk to you later.
Charlie's decision to call his wife nearly cost him his life. "22 floors above Charlie Carraher was Shimmy Beagleisen, a vice president at an investment management company. Shimmy was making calls to his family to let them know he was okay.
The phone rang and it was Shimmy. Ma, don't worry, I'm fine. And I said, please don't waste any time. I know all about it. Get out. And he said, listen. And he put the receiver up to the loudspeaker, and I heard the announcement, do not leave your office. This building is secure. As we hung up, my nephew called, and he was practically incoherent. He said, Shimmy, Trade Center. I said, Shimmy is okay. And as I said, okay, I never got the K out because I saw the plane hit the other building.
When the second plane hit on live TV, what dawned on the world is that it wasn't an accident. It wasn't a plane just flying too low, that it was a deliberate attack on the World Trade Center and on America.
17 minutes after the North Tower was struck, United Airlines Flight 175 crashed into the South Tower. The emergency services were immediately deluged with calls. Some 700 people were trapped above the impact zone.
Commander Fort David to Lieutenant, dispatch.
Yes,
Hi, Major disaster at the World Trade Center. Requesting everything possible.
Northwest Conference Room.
Tower 2, room 105. This is at the World Trade Center. People are trapped. I have a call on the line. Who are you?
What are you on?
They're not answering.
We're getting millions off West Conference Room. All I can tell you to do is stay near the window, stay low, put the tower by the door. The firefighters in the city are on their way over there. They'll get to you as soon as they can.
The message that Charlie Carraher left for his wife, Catherine, records the moment the plane hit the second tower.
If you listen to the message, it was like, I didn't even get my name out before the plane hit my building.
Hi, Catherine. This is, Charlie. I'm okay, all right? I want to see you. I'm going to hold you. I'll talk to you later.
Just the whole thing changed. It just millions of things raced through your head. It's just unbelievable. Progressively, my timeline for the future got shorter and shorter. And by the time the plane hit, I was only thinking of, 45 seconds ahead. Can I get to that door? Can I get to this door? And it was sad. I was sad. I was sad that I was going to die. It wasn't really upsetting. If it just happened, bam, out of the blue, I don't know what would happen. But I had just watched a bunch of people die, and that somehow, I guess, gets you used to the idea of dying. And it was just with sadness.
Charlie's wife, Catherine, was unaware of what had happened. She was on the subway going to work.
I was late as usual because I was always late for work, and I got on the train, and the train kept stopping and starting. There were lots of delays, and they kept saying, there's been an incident at the World Trade Center, that's the cause of the delay.
Ladies and gentlemen, due to a plane crash at the World Trade Center, all service are
when we hit the Manhattan Bridge, someone yelled out, "The Twin Towers are on fire." And I panicked. I definitely panicked. I told everybody in the car, my husband's in that building, I've got to talk to him. And so everybody gave me their phone. I used everybody's phones, and no phone would work. And we're all just glued to the windows watching it. I mean, they were right there. You could touch them practically.
We had fire drills, I think, once a month. A guy would come out and he'd say, this section uses this staircase. And I went to that staircase and it didn't exist anymore. First of all, the building was on a slant where I was. It was like walking in what we call like a fun house. You know, everything looks right, but it's on an angle. And then when I got to the fire escape section, it was like a fire door with a window you could see through, and there was like I-beams hanging down. It just walls not there. I couldn't. The fire escape was the door going down the building was maybe 10 feet away from the door. The fire door, and there was too much debris in the way. There was no way I was going to get through it. And I remember seeing these crack on the wall. It was actually like, moving. And the floors, even on that side in the fire escape, were slanted. And it was really weird. I didn't see a soul. It was in there. It was completely empty.
The second plane hit floors from the 78th floor to the 84th floor, and it hit at a much sharper angle than the first one. And the real tragedy about it is that the bottom wing went through the 78th floor, which is where the elevator lobby was. And the elevator lobby at the time had probably 200 people in it. And it was a scene of incredible carnage.
I understand that, sir. I understand that. All right, we're trying to get to people as fast as we can.
Brian Clark, a 54-year-old executive vice president at investment company Eurobrokers, had worked in the World Trade Center for almost 30 years.
We had lived through the 1993 bombing, and the fact that something had happened, catastrophic, let's call it, next door, and 15, 17 minutes later, the same thing in the South Tower, I knew in that instant that it was terrorism. The room we were standing in absolutely fell apart. Walls were torn at a jagged angle. Everything fell out of the ceiling. Speakers, lighting, cables, air conditioning ducts, everything came down. The sensation was that the whole building was moving to the west very slowly in just this one half oscillation. And the sensation was that it moved at 6 to 8 feet. My instinct was that I have a responsibility to try and get people off the floor.
Brian's training as a volunteer fire marshal would prove to be crucial.
There were 6 or 7 other people in the room with us, and I led them into the corridor. And we went to the center core. In that one hallway, there were no stairways. I had a choice to go to my right to stairway C, forward to stairway B, or left turn to stairway A. I, for unknown reasons, just felt this nudge and turned to my left and found stairway A.
Meanwhile, Diane, Brian's wife, learned of the attack by watching the news.
Unfolding in New York City. Both towers of the World Trade Center have apparently been hit by aircraft.
She wasn't worried because she thought he worked well below the impact zone. She and Brian had been married for 31 years.
We actually met when we were in the first year of high school, and it was very apparent to me by the time I finished high school that Brian was the person for me.
Diane and Brian have 4 married children.
Our son Tim called, and he was at work. I said, "Don't worry, Tim, because Dad's not. It's hit way higher than Dad is." And Tim said, "Mom, Dad's not on the 31st floor. He's on the 84th floor." And then I realized, I could see it so clearly, that the plane had come in just about at his floor.
But Brian's office on the 84th floor was on the other side of the building from the plane's impact. He led a group of 7 people down the stairs. At the 81st floor, they met 2 people coming up, trying to escape the thick smoke below. So the group decided to go back up the stairs, but Brian remained behind.
I got completely distracted by hearing this banging noise inside the 81st floor, and I continued on to this voice with my flashlight, and as I got closer and closer, him directing me left, right, toward his voice, suddenly he said, "Can you see my hand? Can you see my hand?" And I mean, we were just 2 yards apart probably, and then suddenly this waving hand came into focus, and I shone the light. He was down near the floor level, shone the light up his arm, and saw, really poking through a hole in the wall, these two bright eyes, and immediately was, "Hallelujah, I've been saved."
Stanley Premnath was buried under heavy debris, trapped there when the second plane crashed into his South Tower office on the 81st floor.
2 of the stairways were blocked and could not go down. Stairway A was on the far side of where the plane had crashed in. It had hit in the floors where the elevator equipment was. And the World Trade Center had this mammoth elevator engines, and it literally stopped the impact of the plane, and Stairway A was on the far side. And that survived the impact zone.
When we got out onto the 81st floor landing, of course everybody else had gone up, but my instinct was, I want to try. I want to see what's down there. And I shone my light down the stairs, and there was some smoke coming up. And we dug our way through rubble for several floors, mostly drywall that had blown in on the stairs, but in the darkness you weren't 100% sure what it was. We slid some because there was water flowing underfoot. And by the 78th floor, as we passed that floor, the wall was cracked and there were little flames licking up inside the wall. And we kept going. It got a little better on 77, and by the 74th floor, we broke into what I would call almost normal conditions. Fresh air, lights on.
In the South Tower, anyone below the impact zone between the 77th and 85th floors were getting out, if they could.
Stanley and I continued on down until we got to the 44th floor. We went in there, and in the middle of that floor, which is like a long hotel lobby, if you like, that runs the entire length of the building, there was one security guard in gray flannel slacks and his blue blazer, and he looked at us quite excited. He said, "Do you have telephones?" And both of us said, "No, we don't have phones." He said, "Oh," he says, "my phones don't work." He said, "But I'll stay with this man," and he kind of backed up, and there was a man, a Caucasian, massive head wounds, back wounds, semi-conscious, lying on the floor. How he got the injuries, how he got to the 44th floor, I don't know. But the security guard said, "I'll stay with this man, but you must promise me to get a medic and a stretcher to the 44th floor." I said, "We'll do our best." Stanley and I went back to the stairs, down, down, down. On the 31st floor, it was completely vacant. Nobody was present except Stanley and I. We got into their conference room, and I picked up the conference room telephone and got dial tone.
It was Brian calling. He said that he was okay. There was a cheer went up in the house, and we could just we knew that he was okay.
Some of the images and sounds you're about to see and hear are graphic in nature. Viewer discretion is advised. With the seconds ticking away, Brian Clark kept his promise to the security guard and called for help.
I then called 911 to tell them about the man on the 44th floor, and they needed a medic and a stretcher to get there, and I got put on hold.
On the 44th floor?
44th floor, Tower 2. Head injuries, the person's in pain, lying down, can't walk. Can I not leave you with that message, please, and just me begin walking down again?
You have to talk to EMS. Hold on.
Oh, dear.
Okay. Hello,
EMS. I'm sure you got lots of calls. I'm just alerting you to the
44th floor of Tower 2. There is a man down with head injuries.
Okay, if this is at the World Trade?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, we have a lot of units over there on the scene already.
Well, can you make sure somebody gets to the 44th floor lobby? There is a security guard with him, but he has no phones out at that floor. So I'm making a call from another floor.
All right, you're not a police operator, right?
No, I'm not. I'm just a tenant in the middle of evacuating. I want to keep walking, but I just want to make sure that somebody knows about this man on the 44th floor of Tower 2.
Oh, goodness. Hold on a second. Because we are so backed up here.
Well, I'm sure you are, but can you write that down and I can keep walking, please?
Well, as soon as I get... Sure, hold on 1 second, because we have so much information on here that our computers are down.
Yeah, well, okay. But I have to keep walking. I'm sorry.
No problem.
Thank you.
The response of the emergency service operators tell you what was happening in real time. The sorrow, the intensity, the fear, the lack of understanding of what's going on.
Sir, you're an idiot. I'm going to hear the noise. When they're going to come up to you, you're going to have to check every room. I feel so bad that we can't do more. You don't know. Oh, boy. God, it's an awful thing. It's an awful, awful, awful thing to call somebody and tell them you're going to die. That's an awful thing.
Just seconds before the South Tower was hit, Shimmy Beagle Eisen's mother had urged him to leave. Now he was trapped on the 97th floor. By 9:15, Shimmy's loved ones had filled the family's Brooklyn apartment. The phone passed between them as each offered him consolation and advice.
We had Shimmy on the phone. We were trying to find different ways how to calm him down and relax him, possibly of different ways of maybe getting out and trying different exits. At one point when I was talking to him, he shared a few private things with me. He asked me to look after his wife and children. And all this time, I was able to hear in his voice that the situation was becoming a lot worse.
There was now fire and dense smoke above the impact zone, and those trapped there began to panic. Shimmy's best friend, David, called to try and calm him, keeping 911 on the other line.
Shimmy? Yeah. Just hang in there. Just breathe slowly through the towel. You breathing through the towel? It's fine. Okay, it's fine. Everybody's fine. Everybody's very calm. Everything's going to be fine. You have to stay calm. Everybody here is calm, I promise you. The girls don't even know because they're in school. The parents are here. They're very calm. Just keep your head straight. Okay, do you see smoke by the window? The fire department wants to... You can't see?
Do we see smoke by the windows? The fire department wants to know. No smoke by the window.
No smoke by the window. Listen carefully. As a last resort, break the window as small as possible just to get a little air in. Okay, but you follow?
Yeah.
Okay, how's that?
They said the last resort we should open the window just a little bit to get some air in.
Can you open the window or you have to break it? Yeah.
Huh? You have to break it.
Yeah? Okay, Shimmy.
Yeah.
Break the window.
Break the window.
As little as possible. Just get a little air. Just get a little air. If you're running out of air.
If you're running out of air, we should do that.
Okay.
Okay?
I'm very grateful that he was able to spend his last moments speaking to the people who were closest to him. At the end of your life, I would imagine you want some sort of comfort, and I hope, and it seems from what everyone has told me, that he was given that. That's all I could hope for.
What strikes me about these final calls is the range of human emotion, the terror when talking to a dispatcher who's supposed to rescue him, and the focus of giving one message to a loved one, I love you, and tell the children I love you, is how focused. They didn't dabble on, they didn't try to stay on the line. They said what was most important to them.
Stephen Muldery was a 33-year-old equities trader working for an investment company in the South Tower.
September 11th. It was a beautiful, beautiful day, as everyone always will remember, I know. I was very pleased to be going to a yoga class around the corner in the village hall. And at the end of the class, I walked home, and when I came into this house, there was a blinking light on the answering machine, and I had 6 messages. Not the usual thing. And one of the messages was from Stephen.
Mom, it's Stephen. My plane, my building got hit by a plane, and right now it's, I think I'm okay, I'm safe now, but it's smoky. I just want to say how much I love you, and I will call you when I'm safe. Okay, Mom? Bye.
Stephen worked in the South Tower. He was on the 89th floor. He said that he was going to call me and that he was going to be all right. There were messages then from people calling to say, Anne, are your children all right? And then there was a message from my husband, and he said, promise me you will not turn on the television. And that was an easy promise to make. Family came, girl, boy, girl, so there was a little triumvirate at the top. And then 4 boys came in a very quick succession. And Stephen was the third of that group of 4. I just went out in the backyard and I sat in a plastic, you know, those $5 plastic chairs under a tree, and with the phone in my lap, preparing myself for what I would need to face.
Northwest corner.
Okay, now, you get soaking wet towels, and you can put them at the doorways.
Families often have a map in their minds of where their loved ones are in the world. You know, if somebody in your family is working at a place that has now become the center of all the world's attention, and there's a calamity unfolding, in your mind, you're trying to place your loved one. Where are they in relationship to this terrible series of events that's unfolding?
Jim Gartenberg, a successful real estate executive, had recently accepted a promotion at a new company. September 11th was Jim's last day working at the World Trade Center.
Saying goodbye, I love you, is the last thing I can remember. Seeing him walking out the door that morning on September 11th.
Jill and Jim had been married for 7 years. Their daughter Nicole was 3 years old.
I went to work soon after he did, and my office is very close to our apartment, so I just walked the few blocks. When I got there, there was a message light blinking, and I listened to the machine right away.
Jill, there's a fire that's there. I love you, girl. I love you. I don't know if I'm going to be okay here. I love you so much.
And that was, I didn't even know what that meant. I listened to the message actually several times because I wasn't really sure what he was saying. I couldn't believe what he was saying. Just a minute later, I spoke to him. Unlike the message on the machine, which sounded frantic, when I first spoke to him, he sounded very calm, very controlled. He said to me, I'm going to be okay. You know, there's a fire, but I'm going to be okay. And he said I said, stay down low. I mean, right? What we learned, stay down low if there's a fire. And he stayed down low, and he was hiding behind a desk, and he was trying to call for help, and he had no idea what was going on.
In Chicago, Jim's closest friend Adam had just arrived at work.
I turned on CNBC, and they said, you know, we go live to the World Trade Center, and there was smoke coming out of the building. The first thing I did was call his office. He picked up the phone right away, and he had a a voice that I'd never heard before, and it was, you know, just utter panic and fear and expletives. There's fire, there's smoke everywhere, there's debris, I can't get out. You got to get me out of here. He had asked what happened, and he didn't know, and I didn't know.
Jim was 6 floors below the point of impact. He was trapped by falling debris.
His comments were then, real calm, okay, what are we supposed to do? And I told him, there's fire and it's going up, you need to get down. And he said, I can't go anywhere, the stairs are blown out below us, you know, the debris is too heavy, we can't move anything.
At this point, a half hour had passed. Having spoken to his wife Jill and best friend Adam, Jim now wanted his predicament to be known to the watching world. He managed to make contact with a reporter at the New York Times, Jim Dwyer.
I spoke with him several times that morning, and I was trying to understand what his predicament was, why he couldn't get to the stairs or why he couldn't get to an exit. And he said that, you know, the walls were cracking and folding over, and he couldn't get to where he needed to be. Mr. Gartenberg seemed to be very directed, very focused. I mean, he was, you know, there's a sense of great urgency in his voice, but I didn't feel like he was panicking. He wanted people to know where he was and that he couldn't leave the building.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Nicole. Yay. Yay. Are you taking me in picture?
Jim has always been a leader. And I think that showed through on that day.
Nicole, is Daddy so funny?
When I first met Jim, he was the president of the Michigan Alumni Club in New York. I saw the way that he was running this meeting and the way he was interacting with people and his leadership skills. There was all these qualities about him that all of a sudden I said, wow, this is a really special guy.
After speaking to the New York Times, Jim's next call was to a New York TV news station. At 9:32, 45 minutes after the first tower was hit, Jim's voice was heard on national television.
Jim Gartenberg joins us. He was on the 86th floor of, I'm not sure which tower. Was it the north or south, Jim?
It's World Trade Center 1, and it's not was. I am here, and I'm stuck right now.
Now, are you above, Jim, or below?
I have no idea. I have no idea where the plane hit. It's my understanding that it's a plane.
Jim, there are 2 planes. One went into one tower, one went into the other tower. What do you see around you? I mean, are you in smoke? Are you in fire? I mean,
the first thing that I want to make clear is that I'm stuck on the 86th floor. A fire door has trapped us. Debris has fallen around us, and part of the core of the building is blown out.
How many people are with you, Jim?
I'm with one other person, and I'm told that people are aware of this. I'm on the 86th floor on the east side of the building facing the East River.
And what time did you get...
If I'm on the air, I want to tell anybody that has a family member that may be in the building that the situation is under control for the moment, and the danger has not increased. So please, all family members, take it easy.
I got a phone call from a friend of mine on my cell phone saying, Jill, Jim's going to be okay. He was just on national television, and he said he's going to be okay. She told me what he said and how confident he was about it.
They broadcast his voice. I still have tapes of that and listen to it, and it's eerie. The voice that I hear on that is not his, and it's just so odd as far as the voice is concerned. But his message was unbelievably calm and brave and stoic. Having seen that was just a tremendous tribute.
I think for a lot of people to be in crisis mode, they would just sit there and scream. And Jim kind of regrouped with himself, it seems like, and said, okay, this is the situation, how do I best deal with this? And he reached out to as many people as he could, trying to figure out what resources he had to be helpful in this situation. I mean, he had the sense of mind to do that.
and the danger has not increased, so please all family members take it easy.
I think that was wonderful, but I knew in my heart he was not going to be okay.
You got it coming in for building number 2 on the 97th floor, people trapped.
90 what floor? Where all around the building.
Almost 2,000 people were trapped in the North and South Towers. Firefighters from across New York were sent to the scene. Knowing what he might soon face, fireman Walter Hines left a hurried voice message for his wife.
Hi, Ron, it's me. Just want to let you know I love you and the girls. Tell my mom we're going down to that trade center thing, the second plane that just crashed into that building. So we're on our way down there. I love you. I'll talk to you later.
Walter knew this was so serious. I could tell from the sound of his voice. He knew this was something he might not get out of. And I think that he just needed to let us know that he loved us. The voice message that Walter left is still on his business phone, which I've kept in his office. I've probably listened to the message hundreds of times. Everybody has told me that has lost loved ones that you lose the sound of their voice, that you can't remember the sound of people's voices after they've gone. And I tend to think that that's true. I think it's a good reminder to have Walter's message for my daughters, that they can continue to hear him.
Stephen was with us for 33 years. And we have a choice. We can either say we are so mad that he's not here, or we can say we had him for 33 years, and we have a feast to return to, the feast of the memories.
Stephen worked alongside a group of close college friends, all former high school athletes.
Stephen was very relaxed, smiling, laughing.
He was very laid back, very happy. You know, he really was happy a lot of the time.
Stephen was really a peacekeeper within the family because we all have very strong personalities, and at a dinner table we all want to voice our opinion, and Stephen was the best, I think, of any of us of listening to all sides of an argument and really keeping the peace.
In the South Tower, the second to be hit, conditions were now desperate. As the fire spread, Stephen and his colleagues made a collective decision to stick together and try to reach the roof. They now faced a grueling 21-story climb up the stairwells through smoke and dust. But once there, they discovered that there was no access to the roof. They retreated back down the stairwells and took refuge in an empty conference room on the 88th floor. Sharing a single mobile phone, each one took turns to say their goodbyes.
Stephen and others passed the phone around and let people get word out to their family members. And at this point, there was a sense of dread among those people making the calls. There was a sense that they were doomed. And they knew how isolated they were. They knew they were in the sky, far from the ground, and that their chances were very slim. People used their last minutes of conversation to talk with their families and their loved ones and their friends. They said, "You made my life better, you know, I want you to take care of so-and-so. I want you to, know this about the truth of our lives." And it was a kind of a moment of truth for many people, a moment of desperate truth, but also transcendent truth.
An hour after the first plane struck the North Tower, some people were still trying to make first contact with loved ones. But the phone networks were overloaded. Tom McGinnis, a commodities broker, was trapped above the impact zone. Like Stephen Muldery, Tom knew that there was no way down.
Right away I say, "Where are you? Where are you?" And I'm almost annoyed because he's not answering me. And then he says, "We're in a conference room that we can't get out of. We're trapped in a conference room." And I said, "Well, who's with you?" And he rattles off the names of a couple of guys I know, 3 guys, these other people. And you could hear it in the background. You could hear people talking. You didn't hear panic. You heard, I remember one guy yelling, "Let's just knock down this damn wall." I remember telling him, I said, "You're going to get out of there." I kept telling him that. And that's when he said to me, he goes, "Leanna, you don't understand." He says, "There are people jumping from the floors above us." And that's when I just thought, oh my God. Like, what are these guys going through that they are seeing what's going on right above them? And it was just unbelievable. And I just kept saying, "You're coming home tonight. You're coming home tonight." And he said, "I love you." And he said, "Take care of Caitlin." He said, "I have to get down on the floor. I love you." And that's when I lost the connection at that point. There is a great comfort in the fact that I got to talk to him. And the funny thing about that comfort is it was not a great comfort that day or even, weeks later. But it's a great comfort now. It was a great comfort months later. And the reason it was a great comfort is because, it's not so much for me, but I feel that it was for him. It was his chance to say goodbye, his chance to say, "Take care of Caitlin." He said, "It'll be a miracle if we get out of here." He knew he wasn't going to get out.
James Cartier was trapped on the 105th floor of the South Tower. He had called his brother John to come to the site to help their sister Michelle, but she had already escaped from the North Tower. Now she and John were on the ground looking for James.
I was trying to separate people and focus on seeing James coming through, and we waited, and we didn't see him come out.
For the people on the upper floors, they really did have the knowledge that they were going to die, which is unusual. Even when you have disease, you have time to reconcile with it. But here there was people in the heart of their life, young people. They started on a sunny day, and 102 minutes later, they're confronting really the most basic things in their life, and they have just a few things to say, and they say it with all their heart.
James then made a final phone call to another family member.
He says to my sister Maria, that he was with a lot of people, and that was comforting to hear that he wasn't alone, and that he didn't leave this world alone. He said that they were looking for a way down and they couldn't find a way, but they were still trying. And he turned and he says, the last thing he says to my sister, he says, "Tell Mommy and Daddy that I love them. Tell everybody that I love them." And then, all the debris is falling around us. But at the same time that both my sister and myself were running for our lives, my brother was losing his.
By 10 o'clock, the rescue operation had made very little progress. The fire department had been plagued by malfunctioning radio receivers within the towers. Inside on the stairwells, firefighters were unable to communicate with each other. But that silence was about to be broken.
Someone was able to make the radio receiver work, and we have a remarkable, illuminating document of the effort to get up to the high floors in the South Tower.
Battalion 7 on floor 40 of Tower 2. We got one elevator working up to the 40th floor, staffed by a member of Line 15.
The man who repaired the radio receiver was 45-year-old Oriel Palmer. As chief of Battalion 7, Palmer was amongst the first to arrive at the scene. As he entered the South Tower, he single-handedly fixed an elevator and took it to the 40th floor, halfway to where almost 700 people were struggling to stay alive.
And then he started to climb on foot. And because he was a very, very fit man, he was able to make tremendous progress. He had run marathons, he ran half marathons.
We're on the 43rd floor. There's stairway B. What floor should we try to get up to, Oriole? I'm up to 5'5".
He went 12 floors in 10 minutes, wearing all the bunker gear, which is 50 or 60 pounds.
We're going to have to host it. I'm on 69 now, so we need to higher back, sir. These stairway walls have been compromised on 73 and 74. Walls are breached, so be careful. Okay.
When I first heard Oriole's voice on the tapes, you can tell he knows he's in a race against time.
Oriole's conserving his oxygen, he's conserving his energy. That's why there's not a lot of chatter on his part on the tape.
During his ascent, Palmer discovered that one stairwell, the south, was still intact all the way to the impact zone. For the hundreds of people trapped there, this stairwell could have been an escape route.
What floor are you in, Oriole? South Tower, South Tower.
The 78th floor in the South Tower is a bridge point between living and the dead. It was a transfer spot in the elevator system, and a lot of people had mass there. And when the second plane hit, a lot of them were killed outright, a lot of them were injured and waiting for help. And Oriole Palmer was rising and racing to that point to get to them.
We got two isolated pockets of fire. We should be able to knock it down with 2 lines. Where you know that? 78th floor, it's numerous 1045 code lines. 478. That's all here. Numerous civilians, there's 2 engines up here. All right, 10-4, we're on our way.
Oriole got up there pretty quick. Anyone who was wounded or dying, to know somebody was able to get up there, they knew there had to be a way out. The people who were there at the point of impact, to have seen him, I can only imagine there must have been some elation or euphoria that's probably undescribable. Maybe. Just to see him and realize there's some hope here, thanks to this guy who just made it up here.
When I heard the tapes, you were watching a screen with all the words on it, but with a digital countdown, so you knew exactly what was coming. You knew the exact minute that the towers were going to go down. And you can't help but feel like you want to jump out of your seat and say, hurry up and get out of there. You know, you have 1 more minute before it comes down. And that's the hard part. That was the hard part. I was not surprised when I heard that Oriole had made it to the 78th floor. He made it up to the point of impact, and it's amazing. He left a story behind. My kids will have it, their kids will have it, and I just feel that it's to honor his memory and the person that he was.
7 minutes after Oriole's last words, the South Tower would collapse.
Major collapse of Tower 2, and we lost the field comm totally.
Some of the images and sounds you are about to see and hear are graphic in nature. Viewer discretion is advised. There is one phone call from the tower that captures the horror of the event. It highlights the moral complexity of hearing the suffering of those trapped inside. Kevin Cosgrove, a vice president at Aon Insurance Company, was on the phone to 911 as the tower began to fall.
Kevin was a wonderful father. He was mostly here for his kids, and they are better for having had him for a dad. Looking at his children, his presence is there in his children, our children. It's not that I can communicate with him at all, but I always feel his presence.
Parts of Kevin's call were made public when it was played by the prosecution in the trial of a key 9/11 terrorist. It was used to illustrate the human suffering on that day.
And I said, what's the telephone number you're calling? You can barely see. You can barely see there, 41, 26, 23. It's on 105th floor in the northwest corner, right? Right.
His words haunt me, and I try not to think about it, but it's also, in a way, kind of a comfort to know where he was and what he went through and what he was trying to do. Kevin was always thinking of his family, and he desperately wanted to get out of that building and come home to us. He knew how much we needed him. We were supposed to have many years together. We were supposed to grow old together.
Yeah, my wife thinks I'm all right. I called her and said I was leaving the building. I was fine, and bang. It was smoke really bad. 105, 2 power. All right, sit tight. We'll get to you as soon as we can. Yeah, she's staying up, but the smoke's really bad, man. I barely leave. That's all we can do. Where are you? What are you guys up to? We're getting there. We're getting there. Doesn't feel like it, man. I got young kids. I understand that, sir.
One lady called him the voice from the towers. It made it real for her, that it wasn't just a news story, that there were really people in there and it wasn't just buildings.
There's lots of people up here. I understand. Smoke rises really big. We're on the floor. We're in a window. And then I have to barely breathe now. Can't see. Okay. Just try to hang it there. I'm going to stay with you. It's really bad. It's black. It's iron. We're young men. We're not ready to die. I understand. Hello? Hello? We're looking at financial center. 3 of us, 2 broken windows.
Kevin would take Elizabeth on the bike and go for rides, and he took her to a playground. And after he died, Elizabeth said to me, "Mommy, can you take me to the secret playground?" And I said, "I don't know where it is." I guess what I would want people to learn from listening to the recording is that life is short, that you never know when you're going to lose your loved ones, and to spend every minute you can showing them that love. And that's what's important in life.
Tower 2. George, have them mobilize the Army. We need the Army in Manhattan.
After 62 minutes, the South Tower, although the second to be hit, was the first to fall. Almost 1,000 civilians and uniformed services people died. They included Kevin Cosgrove, Oriole Palmer, Brad Fetchett, Shimmy Beagleisen, James Cartier, and Stephen Muldery.
The phone rang, and it was Amy, my youngest daughter. And the first thing I said to her was, "Where's Stephen?" And she didn't answer. There was just silence.
I got home and I called my mother, and she was so happy to hear my voice. And I told her about Stephen. And I just know she just screamed, and that was it.
She knew he was gone. And a sound came out of me that I'd never heard in my life. It was just an animal sound. And I knew when I heard that sound for the first time in my life, that howl, that it was universal. And that, you know, my family and I had joined all the losses of all the ages.
Mom, it's Steven. My plane, my building got hit by a plane, and right now it's, I think I'm okay, I'm safe now.
The message that he left for me meant everything to me. I mean, I clung to it. I listened to it repeatedly in the days after. But I did put it aside at a certain point and say that I would not continue to do that.
I think I'm okay, I'm safe now.
And a very odd thing happened, and it is that as time went by, I created a new message that had never been left. I added to what he had left, thinking he had left it. In his message to me, he said, "I'll be all right, and I will call you." In the message that I then began living with, you know, maybe a year after, was, "I'll be all right, and you will too." I made him say it in my memory over and over and over again.
When it came down with this thunderous collapse, it changed the whole narrative of what was going on in the North Tower. No longer were people saying, "We're going to rescue." It was, "Get out." The firefighters started to leave, the police started to leave, and even a few people who had been staying waiting for a rescue started fleeing down the stairs.
After the collapse of the South Tower, those still trapped in the North Tower had no idea that their fate was sealed. One of them was Jim Gartenberg.
Jim Gartenberg was sort of a unique case in the Twin Towers because he had so much communication with the outside world. He worked at a real estate firm on the 86th floor, about 7 floors below where the crash was. Almost everyone else on his floor survived. And he talked with his wife, he talked with the ABC news station, and he reported that the walls had collapsed around him and he didn't have access to the stairwells.
Jim Gartenberg joins us. He was on the 86th floor of, I'm not sure which tower. Was it the north or south, Jim?
It's World Trade Center 1, and it's not was. I am here, and I'm stuck right now.
For Jim's family and friends, the collapse of the South Tower was a terrifying premonition.
I was on the phone with one of Jim's friends when the first tower collapsed. All you could hear if you listened in on the call was just crying and wailing. And then this, after about 5 or 10 minutes of that, this sense of calm that, oh wait, that's not his tower. It feels strange to report on the events of that day that we just isolated Jimmy's safety and how we could distance ourselves from the horrific event and the casualties that everybody else faced. But that felt like our duty.
My parents were down in Florida on September 11th. They were not watching television until I told them to turn it on. My father was counting the floors to see, because he saw it on television. He was trying to figure out if Jim was above or below where the plane had hit. And the first thing my father said to me was, he was such a great father. You know, and I said that makes it real, because for me to think he's not going to make it out is one thing, but for my father to say that, because if it's in the past, that made it real, more real for me, that this was really, his life was ending.
At 10:28 a.m., 102 minutes after it was hit, the North Tower fell. Almost 3,000 civilians and uniformed services people died that day.
I saw the tower fall. Yeah, I saw the tower fall down, and I knew for sure I'd never hear from him again. I saw his life end right there.
Melissa Harrington Hughes, a 31-year-old business executive from San Francisco, was in New York for just one day. She had been attending a breakfast meeting near the top of the North Tower.
Melissa Harrington Hughes' position was very precarious from the beginning. The smoke would have immediately started coming up to the floor because she was so close to the explosion. She would have been in peril almost from the moment at 8:46 a.m. when the plane hit the building.
Shortly after the first plane had hit her building, Melissa had called her father.
When we stopped our conversation, I thought she sounded in control of herself, and knowing my daughter Melissa the way I knew her, I didn't think she would have any problem getting out of the building.
But 55 minutes had passed. While Melissa's father watched the events unfold on the television, Melissa's husband, Sean, was asleep on the West Coast. They had been married only a year.
Melissa met Sean at a junior club dance. He was a very nice young man, and they were an extremely attractive couple.
I could tell when she introduced me to him, her eyes just kind of glowed, and I could tell right away that he was probably the one that she was going to marry, and she did.
Exchange a kiss as a sign of their new married love. May I present you for the first time Mr. and Mrs. Sean Hughes.
Melissa's final phone message was to Sean.
John, it's me. I just wanted to let you know I love you, and I'm stuck in this building in New York. There's lots of smoke, and I just wanted you to know that I love you always.
When I heard her message to Sean, I heard in her voice hopelessness. She was telling Sean that this is it, Sean, for me, but I'll love you forever, buddy.
When the North Tower collapsed, 1,402 civilians died. Along with Melissa Harrington Hughes, they included Jim Gartenberg, Christopher Hanley, Brian Nunez, and Tom McGinnis. Diane Clark had last talked to her husband 25 minutes before his tower collapsed. Now she feared the worst.
Yeah, I thought I'd lost him. At that point, left everybody here, and I walked outside, and I paced, and I just was by myself for a long, long time, pacing on the patio.
Amazingly, Brian Clark was one of only 4 people to escape from the floors above the impact zone in the South Tower. He and Stanley Premnath got out with only seconds to spare.
It took 8 or 10 seconds for it to dissolve in front of us, but in this cloud of dusk, and we just stared, not understanding really what had happened. Trinity Church between us and the South Tower almost acted like a seawall, and so the white cloud hit that church and exploded upwards. And it was almost above us when we realized we had to run. So Stanley and I were in 42 Broadway for about 45 minutes. We waited for dust to settle. We learned a little bit about each other's families, and Stanley gave me his personal business card. And I tucked it in my shirt pocket at the time, and as we walked down through this snow, it wasn't particularly crowded, but somehow we got separated. And I thought for a moment, oh, there was no Stanley, that was just a guardian angel sent to get me. And I reached in my pocket and pulled out the business card, so there was a Stanley. I always say there would be a very interesting story if there was no business card there, but I've kept that business card until that day. I put it in my wallet then, and it's still there. I was the last one on the ferry, so I was the first one off. Ran down the dock. Now about 11:15, so an hour and 15 minutes after our tower had collapsed. And I, first one there, was able to use the phone, dialed home.
Eventually, I came inside, and as I passed the phone, it rang. I answered it, and I heard Brian's voice on the end of the line. Apparently, I fainted.
Diane had an entirely different experience that day than I. Diane and all my family at home, and especially Diane, thought, oh, something horrible happened at 9:03, then relief at 9:35, and then death again at 10 o'clock, and then relief an hour and 15 minutes later. So the emotional swing up and down for her was something I did not experience at all.
Dealing with that underlying fear has come back on the anniversary of 9/11. Each time I have had to kind of work through that terror of that day.
61 of Brian's colleagues were killed. Later, Brian helped create a relief fund for the families of those lost from his company, Eurobrokers.
Hi, Catherine. This is Charlie. I'm okay, all right? I want to see you. I'm going to hold you. I'll talk to you later.
Charlie Carraher also had a lucky escape that day. He was one of the last people to make it out of the South Tower alive.
When I got outside, from every direction, you just heard sirens coming. It seemed like everything with a siren in New York was headed down to the Trade Center. That sound was overwhelming. That sound, you'll never hear anything like it again. You'd have to hear like 100 sirens go off at once. Over the course of the next month, I just, started retelling my story to anyone who would listen, and I really do feel that helped me.
It's changed our lives. I think we're closer. He knows I love him.
In the aftermath of 9/11, Charlie left his work as a computer analyst and retrained to be a nurse.
It was fall of 2003 that I just became disenfranchised with the business world. I know I wanted to leave that, and not too many people get to know, I really thought I was gonna die when I was on the 6th floor and the plane hit. And I want different dying thoughts going through my head the next time. And well, hopefully I won't realize. I want to die in my sleep. In this bed next to you, and I'm going first.
For the bereaved families, the shock of September 11th may never recede. But now that several years have passed, they are beginning to understand the profound legacy of their loved one's final words.
The world doesn't stop for every tragic loss of life. And, you know, I kind of wish the world could. The world gets too busy, and I understand you can't. You'd be in constant grieving. It's too easy for me to fall into a place where life is only about endurance, and I think that's a very poor way to live life. It's ignoring all the gifts you're given, and I didn't want to be that way. I didn't want to be that way. And, you know, I can say that I don't think I have.
The Sunday before 9/11, we went to church together, and we were just, you know, talking, you know, after Mass, and he was just, that day was telling me, like, how much he loved working at the Trade Center. That he said, you know, he was 26, a single young man, and he says that it was hard for him to concentrate on working because a lot of the floors were occupied floors, and he said one girl was prettier than the next. You know, he would be working, and he'd say, a pretty girl would walk by, and he would be like, you know, mesmerized. You know, he loved working there, and the Trade Center was, you know, a good experience for him, you know.
In Jackson Heights, Queens, the street where James Cartier used to play as a child has been renamed.
87th Street was very significant. It was where we grew up. It's where my brothers and sisters and I all played games with the neighbors' kids. I think the street renaming would have made James really, really proud. It was saying, okay, James, this is forever going to be your block from now on.
I was the last one from the outside world to talk to Melissa. We were able to say how much we loved each other, and I think of it constantly, all of the time.
Ever since Melissa's passing, I don't want to put a good spin on it, but it's changed him. It's made him more aware of things, I should say. He's a more loving man now than he was before. Didn't show his feelings as much before, and now he does. Like with my son, who was, coincidentally, which was kind of fate, I would have to say, was born on September 11th.
When you leave the face of this earth, all you leave are your children. That's your legacy. Melissa brought a lot of joy into our lives. My inner peace with Melissa's death might come from the fact that I spoke to her. I find a lot of pleasure knowing that Melissa called me, knowing that we were able to say our last goodbyes, basically. I got to talk to Melissa in person, I'll take that to my grave.
I want to tell anybody that has a family member that may be in the building that the situation is under control for the moment. So please, all family members, take it easy.
We found nothing of Jim. He was completely destroyed. So the fact that I've spoken to him means so much to me.
Wow.
open this? It says, Nicole, this was my favorite toy when I was 2. I hope you like it. Love, Natalie.
To have his voice, just to have his voice it's nice. Some last memories.
Good job, Nicole. Keep going.
When Jim passed away, I was 3 months pregnant. You know, here I am with this special gift, as far as I'm concerned, that he left me with. And to me, that's so important that we had that. She has his personality, she's quick-witted, and her sense of humor is just like him.
James, you're fast. Good job.
So knowing that, you know, she's such a part of him, and that my other child's such a part of him, it makes me happy, that part. I think 9/11 comes up pretty regularly in everybody's lives. I mean, you watch television, you go to an airport, anytime you travel.
You didn't go to Zita's house?
So much has changed since 9/11. Everybody talks about 9/11. It's in the newspapers probably every day. And all I think about when I hear that 9/11 is, I am so proud that my husband did what he could that morning.
The question really about the Trade Center is, what are our memories made out of? Are they made out of images and myths? Are they made out of the hard facts? The audible record of that day is essential, because if history is going to be a tool for the living, if memory is going to be something that we can rely on, then you can't blink, you can't turn away. You have to say, this is what happened, and this is how it happened.